Welcome to today's episode of Fire in the Belly. This is where we get to hear some pretty inspiring stories from some amazing people. You know, it's always an absolute pleasure to sit down, take time out and have a warts and all conversation about their journey. I'm always intrigued by what it's taken for people to get to where they are today, and hopefully in this interview we get to hear some more about that. From this, my mission is to help people to find their own fire in their belly, and from that to live the mightiest version of you. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's guest. Success is a process, not an event. Good afternoon and welcome to Fire in the Belly. Today we have Trish McGirr and myself, Pete Lawson. Good afternoon, Trish.
Hello, how are you doing?
Very good, very good. Fire in the Belly, have you heard of it?
I have, and I think it's a great title because that's what the world needs more of.
Yeah.
We need more energy, power, positivity, especially when you are looking out and seeing what's going on, not just in our own wee country, but you know what's happening around the world.
Sure.
A lot of negativity. So let's re-inspire people.
Sure, makes all the difference.
Certainly does.
So to put a bit of background on it, obviously we know each other.
We certainly do.
So I'm not even, timescales have gone completely wrong on me. When did we first come across each other?
I think it's coming up 2 years. Is it that long?
Are you joking?
I think it's 18 months, 2 years.
Well, okay, I would have got that completely wrong. Yes, there we go. So give us a bit of background. So your business card, what's it going to tell us?
Business card is probably going to say something like nurse, therapist, unemployable property investor.
Love it. So this is not a job interview, obviously?
Definitely not. I don't think I wouldn't pass the first sift, I don't think. It's been a long time since I've been employed. I've run my own business for 20 years. But prior to that, in all seriousness, my background was in nursing, specifically in mental health nursing, and we'll return to this theme. And I specialised in addictions, which is another theme that we'll probably come back to several times. So that was my background. That was my professional, my professional expertise, if you like, my qualifications for any job.
Okay.
And when I left the NHS after, as I say, 15 years as a specialist nurse and therapist.
So you started when, sorry, just to give us a timeline?
The 22nd of November 1982.
Wow, okay.
To be very specific.
That's very specific.
So yeah, that's it's 30 years ago.
22nd November
1982.
1982, wow, okay.
So it's...
How do you remember that so well?
It was a day indelibly inked on my little memory.
Okay.
Here's the reason why. When at school, I would be considered one of those kids that is not playing to their full power.
Okay.
So I was gifted in some areas.
Okay.
And certainly definitely not gifted in some others. And I know this will resonate with you, Pete. In terms of English and science subjects and the practical subjects like needlework, stuff that's really important, when you need to darn a sock. I'm your woman. In terms of other academic areas, mathematics, I was absolutely hopeless.
Okay.
Completely hopeless. So much so that when I reached GCSE level, my maths GCSE came back with a U. Nice. Which in those days meant the paper was ungraded because it was so bad.
Okay.
And the reason the 22nd of November 1982 is etched in my memory as to when I started as a student nurse was because prior to that, I had applied obviously for a number of nursing student nurse positions because my mathematics, I didn't have a maths.
Okay. Unclassified subject, or whatever.
It was completely rubbish. Clearly, I couldn't count. It was 1, 2, skip a few, 99, 100. And so I was rejected quite a few times before I finally got a job as a student nurse. And And it's also one of the reasons I specialised early on in my career, because I got a job in mental health nursing.
Okay.
And they weren't as bothered by the mathematics. So, to be fair, I did start as what in those days was called an SEN, so a state enrolled nurse qualification first of all, and then I went on to do my...
so where is this place for us?
This was in Purtiesburn, just outside Belfast, what used to be the asylum.
Okay.
And so that's why I remember it. I tried a few times, and maths was something that will come back. Again, there are a few things here I think already that we're going to come back to. So maths held me back quite a bit in my life.
Okay.
And I'm glad you asked that now, and it's brought this memory up, because it really did play a big feature in both my success and my failure in life and in business. But later on in life I came to realise why I was so bad at maths.
Okay.
So that's where I started, and that's why that date is so etched on my memory, because I had tried and I wanted to be a nurse, and eventually it came good.
Cool. Let's take us right back. So where and when were you born?
Oh, I was born in Belfast.
Okay.
My accent's really English now, isn't it? Have you not noticed?
Yes and no.
My husband, when he listens to this, he'll go, "You went home and you went all Irish." Obviously, I've lived in
a chameleon.
I've lived in near Manchester now for a long time, but born in Belfast, and my parents were certainly not academic. My dad, along with 3 of my 4 brothers, all worked in the shipyard, and Mum worked as a cleaner for the post office. Okay. So by no stretch of any imagination were they a wealthy nor academic family.
Sure.
But I go back to, at the time growing up, I had a talent for English.
Okay.
So I could write very well. I think I still write very well when I decide to write. And I always had the gift of the gab, as we will see as we progress through this podcast.
It's not a test, you're okay. It's like pens down, that's all right. Cool. So, born in Belfast, obviously through that. So, as a young child, what would we have met if we had met you as a 5, 6, 7-year-old?
You'd have found a quite confused and very lonely little girl.
Oh, okay.
I mean, obviously, I was born in 1965, so I lived very much through the Troubles. One of my very early memories living in Belfast was when the Troubles got really bad. Myself and my brother, or youngest of my brothers, he's older than me, I'm the youngest and the only girl. Okay. Maybe that spurred me on a wee bit, actually, being the youngest and the only girl. But when the Troubles were really bad, my mum and dad made the decision to ship myself and my brother off to Liverpool to live with my aunt. My mum was born in Liverpool originally. Okay. And we were shipped off to live with my aunt for a period of time.
What age were you then?
About 5, 6.
5, 6, okay.
And as I say, it was a very confusing time. First of all, a wee girl from Belfast landed in a primary school in Liverpool. To say that I was a curiosity was an understatement. So some of my early memories of certainly sort of 6 months, 12 months in Liverpool was people didn't understand me. The schooling system in Liverpool was very different. And when I was then shipped back to Northern Ireland, which of course, it wasn't my mum's intention to ship us off and leave us, it was very much a protective thing. But when I came back, I had inherited a bit of a Liverpudlian accent, so that was even more confusing for the people back home. And so schooling, maybe that disrupted to some extent some schooling, because there were definite differences. So I was a wee bit lonely. I kind of began to feel like I didn't belong anywhere in particular. Okay. Even at that young age, I began to feel a bit like an outsider looking in on life.
That's quite young for that to happen. It is, and
we wonder, the children really remember kind of what goes on in their lives, and I can definitely say that they do. Certainly, I have a lot of memories of being at primary school. One of them, a friend of mine, is a handwriting expert. Okay. And I always said my handwriting was atrocious. I should have been a doctor, never mind a nurse. But I remember being taught in school in Liverpool to write the full height of a line. Okay. So that a capital would be 2 lines. Oh wow. And a lowercase letter would be 1. And when I came back home and was in primary school, in Mersey Street Primary School in Belfast, being rapped on the knuckles for taking up too much space. so I had this
physically and metaphorically.
Physically, yeah. I didn't take up a lot of space as a height, as you know. I'm 5 foot. But yeah, so it was really weird. So there's been some interesting light and shade in my life throughout my life.
Shouty writing comes from Liverpool.
Shouty writing. Well, clearly I made up for a lack of height by just being loud.
Interesting. Okay. So after 6 months odd, you're back in Belfast?
Yeah, it's probably nearer to 12 months.
Okay.
But it's interesting again how much can change in a very short space of time. So obviously, it's not that the troubles were sorted in Northern Ireland, but it was assumed to be a bit safer to bring us back home. But yeah, I had a lot of wee hang-ups at the time and a lot of wee emotional fears about where did I belong, and you know, I mean, our parents loved us dearly, and they did what they believed to be the right thing.
Sure.
But we had an interesting family life as well, which is where the addictions thing come in, because from a very early age, my dad was quite a heavy drinker.
Okay.
That wasn't unusual, and it's probably still not unusual for a lot of guys in Northern Ireland. But again, early memories were of Dad being this real dual character. Sometimes very jolly, everybody loved him, and at other times he was somebody that was quite scary and not necessarily nice to be around.
Okay. So what was your father's trade?
Well, he was an older father by the time I came along.
Okay.
There's quite a considerable age gap between me and my eldest brother, in the region of 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
I said my dad was a dirty old man, but as this is a podcast, I better be careful who hears it. So my mum was in her 40s again, which was unusual for the time.
Sure.
So my dad and mum originally met during the Second World War.
Wow. Okay.
So as I say, his original trade was Navy. He was Navy, and then became a steel worker at the shipyard,
right,
where a lot of people, of course, in Belfast were employed at.
Down Harlan and Wolff.
Down Harlan Wolff.
Well, okay.
That was the stock in trade, and that was kind of the pathway for most men in that area. You know, was where did you go for a job? You worked in the shipyard, and as thousands of people did at the time.
So you're you yourself and your the child number 4, your other younger brother. The youngest of your brother. Thank you. So the two of you were shipped off. Your other brothers were actually working at that point.
They were working. They were older.
Okay.
Yeah. So so they were all of an age, you know, to be relatively self-sufficient.
Okay. And so in school, how were we getting on?
Back at school, yeah. The report would have been I didn't apply myself, a bit of a chatterbox, quite a dreamer. I love that. I actually love the fact that, you know, back then it wasn't considered to be a good thing to be a bit of a dreamer, but nowadays, what the hell, let's just do it. I'm shy, a very shy kid.
Sure.
Not one of these gregarious, popular kids, you know, that everybody's got to have at their party. I would have been the one at the back of the class that didn't get invited, but I don't mean in a sad kind of way. I was quite happy in my own company. Right. But again, a lot of that was a hangover, pardon the pun, from Dad's regular falling off of the wagon. So, you know, if I was looking at that girl I was then, you know, my dad didn't have the support that there is now for people who would have recognised alcohol problems.
Sure.
At the time, it was just one of those things. We didn't know who was coming in through the door that night. It could be weeks. He would be the George Best type drinker, you know, sober for 6 months and then off the wagon, and holy God, God knows what's going to happen next. And so there was always that kind of who's coming in through the door. As a result of that, I've always been very good at reading other people. It makes you not just wary, but it makes you a relatively good judge of character.
Why when you say reading people, what do you get from that, or what?
And I think this is common, and I go back to the thing that I said about, you know, was it a surprise that I became an addiction specialist? At the time I would have said it was an accident, but the reality is it wasn't really an accident. You know, I specialised early on in mental health problems. My mum suffered from depression a lot in her life.
Yep.
Her relationship with my dad was often violent. And so witnessing domestic violence, being caught up in domestic violence wasn't unusual. It isn't a subject that we talk about a lot in our family now that both our parents are dead, and neither did we at the time. But I think when children are in that environment, and I learned this as both a specialist nurse and a therapist, children brought up in that environment become quite adept at reading the signals. Not just the physical sign of someone who's drunk, but what mood they're in and how quickly those moods can change. I wouldn't change that. I don't. At the time, you don't really understand what you're experiencing as far as that is your normal.
Sure.
In spite of the fact that you then see in other people that that's not normal because they treat you differently.
Sure.
And one of the reasons I was lonely as a kid, I guess, was because I guess some families pitied me.
Okay.
Again, I'm not in a sad way. I'm, oh my God, pity me. But it's one of those that they didn't know how to handle it. They didn't know how to handle the scenario. And so, do you want your children hanging around with someone whose, father is very unpredictable? So I can understand that. I couldn't understand it at the time, but with the benefit of hindsight and the knowledge I have,
Sure.
And the expertise I have, I can see that. But yeah, part of that scenario is just recognising energy. When people's energy is up and down or sideways, as Dad's often was, and as Mum's was too. She, as I say, she had a lifelong problem with depression.
Okay. Do you know where it was triggered with your father? Do you know?
I would say, looking back now, my dad's issues probably stemmed from experiences during the war.
Okay.
He was a multi-decorated, genuine war hero. He was mentioned in the King's Dispatches, which is an honour for meritorious conduct. And he didn't speak very often.
That's ironic.
Yeah, isn't it? Meritorious conduct. Yeah. Having said that, he never drank until he entered the Navy.
Wow.
During the war.
What age do you know?
Yeah, he would have been in his 20s then. But having said that, I guess we would diagnose someone like my dad with PTSD. We would say he was a sufferer of post-traumatic stress disorder, probably as a result of his experiences. And of course, in those days, there was they would call it shell shock. First World War, shell shock was recognised, but often treated by hospitalisation and ice baths. So I would suggest that a lot of his issues, poor impulse control, we would either diagnose him with having something like ADHD or bipolar disorder or PTSD. I'm pretty certain that he suffered from one or all of those things. Okay.
So, I mean, a form of self-therapy then was the alcohol?
Yeah, possibly, yes. And I suppose in some cases it was kind of the norm. Work hard, play hard.
Right.
And then fight the bit out when you get home. That kind of was the cycle at the time.
Where did that come from? Do you know? I mean,
it's an old legacy culture, isn't it? In our, the fighting Irish, isn't it? It's a sad one, but often has been true. And again, as someone who specialised very early on in my career as a specialist addictions nurse. I worked with a lot of families whose experience very much mirrored my own. And again, it's not, although we talk about nurture versus nature, do you automatically go on to follow that footprint of what's been sown in your early life? The answer is not necessarily. And certainly in my own family, that's not played out to be the case. For me, I really didn't drink very much until I was in my 20s, like my dad. But I've never smoked. Drugs never bothered me, and I think it actually turned me in a different direction. So for that, I'm still eternally grateful. And I loved my father dearly, and he loved me, and I have no doubt of that. And as you say, that was my norm.
Sure. And your mother, what was her background and in terms of the role she played with you?
Well, I don't think she knew how to handle a girl because never mind a fifth child. In actual fact, I was the sixth child. My very eldest brother died in infancy.
Okay.
So, and I came along rather unexpectedly.
Okay.
The story that my mum used to tell was that she thought she was menopausal, went to our GP, who was in fact my dad's cousin, and thought she'd explain to him, why she felt she was menopausal. And when he examined her, he said, "You should really get home and get prepared," because at that stage she was 7.5 months pregnant.
Oh, gee, okay.
And I popped out about 5 weeks later.
Wow.
So she didn't really have time to think about it. So we had a good relationship, but we were very alike. So even though she was a victim of domestic violence and stayed with my father all of her life, she had no intention of leaving him, even though many times I wished she had. She was a very stoic woman. She had a very stiff upper lip. Believed that marriage was for life, and
till death us do part.
And was till death us do part. Even though that was often misguided. So we dearly loved each other, but we often clashed.
Who would you be most like then?
Who would I be most like? Oh, I'm most like my mum.
Okay.
I'm definitely most like my mum. And I'm grateful for that. Pretty stoic myself, so that's I think that was a good characteristic to inherit. That's probably why we rubbed each other up the wrong way.
You probably resonated on a very similar frequency.
Oh, I would say so. Yeah, I would say so. And she always, in spite of whatever her lot in life was, she didn't believe she had a bad lot in life. Sure. So from the outside looking in, other people would think differently. I'm not saying she was getting beaten to hell every single week, but there were certainly a lot of occasions when it was thoroughly unpleasant to be in that environment. But she was a very strong woman in her own way.
Wow. So you're back in Belfast. Into secondary school then?
Secondary school, oh my God, secondary school, yeah, so again, I'll return to this theme about maths. Math came back to haunt me in secondary school, because obviously I didn't get my GCSE. Secondary school, in the first year, you're streamed, and I was in the kind of, not the top class, but the middle top class.
For math? For everything? For everything. Okay.
The first year in secondary school, they decided that I was more gifted than they at first thought, and so the second year, when I went in the second year, I was moved up into a more advanced class. I hated every moment of that. Right. I absolutely loved. My mum and dad were thrilled, going around telling everybody that I was gifted. I was mortified because I knew I was shit at maths, and I was despised by the class that I left, because they thought I was Miss Snooty. And I was despised by the class that I joined because they thought that I was an upstart. And so for the rest of my secondary school education, I hated it. I hated secondary school.
Wow. So that's the second time you've been taken out of your own pond.
Yeah, and felt like the outsider looking in. So I couldn't really make anybody happy, let alone myself.
Wow. And
decisions made for me, were in my best interests, but I always felt like, well, they don't feel like it to me. Maybe I was just ungrateful, I don't know. But yeah, so I found making friends difficult.
Sure.
People think I'm a very gregarious person. In actual fact, I'm quite introverted. I'm very happy in my own company, although I also love the company of people.
Sure.
But again, I learned to read people, so I used that skill very carefully through my school years. My secondary school years.
Why would you do that?
I think part of that's protection.
Okay.
Who do you trust? Who do you tell your innermost secrets to that won't use them back against you? Which sounds a bit weird because I'm really very open. But yeah, as I say, so at secondary school it was one of those. It was there was no fanfare. I didn't feel like I wanted to make a fanfare of the fact that teacher said, you're coming top of every single subject except for maths, and we feel you should go into another class to stretch you further. I can understand why a parent would want that, and in my case with my own son, it would be the same. But at the time, it just felt like the biggest disaster because I was just about making friends in the group that I was in, and I kind of had lost them. So it almost repeated itself. I'd lost something from my early years, and here I go again. I've kind of lost that as well, and I'm like, shit, what's this? But I didn't have the awareness or the vocabulary to put into words what I can put into words now.
It's funny, isn't it? I mean, obviously parents are sort of trying to do their best and what feels the best for you, and nowadays it would be treated differently, but
it would maybe. And again, I guess we're more consultative with kids now because we allow kids to articulate more what they are feeling. In those days it was just the decision is made. I came home from school and I was told, by the way, the summer is started, happy days, it's 8 weeks off. By the way, when you're going back into this class and not this class. And there was no discussion, it was just that is what it is. And I had no idea who these other girls were. I was in an all-girls school, so I had no idea who these girls were. And the friends that I had didn't know. So when I went back into school in this September, walking into school and, how are you doing, what have you? And I go left and they go right. And I'm like, holy crap. And I had to start all over again. So it's not the first time. So again, this is another theme. It's not the first time I've started all over again. I've got pretty good at doing that. So again, I can thank those events now for also giving me something. Sure. Which was bounce back ability.
Bounce back ability. Not to be found in any dictionary, but
probably not to be found in any dictionary. It should be though.
Yeah, bounce back ability. Yeah, try and spell it all. So school wasn't fantastic. How far did we get?
We finished at the end of secondary school with, as I say, my some good GCSE results and with a completely ungraded maths paper, which my parents went completely mental. I actually remember turning over the maths GCSE paper and looking at it as if it was written in a language that I didn't understand. I think I finished probably about 2 or 3 of the 60 or so questions, and I knew I hadn't done well because I couldn't finish it. I didn't understand it. It was like I had never been taught half of the subject material. And it was only through a friend of mine who's an educational psychologist that I found out about 3 years ago that I have a thing called dyscalculia, which is like dyslexia, but with maths. So I have a recognised
that word again.
Dyscalculia.
Wow. Okay.
So that explains the reason why the way maths was taught and is taught nowadays wouldn't work for someone like me, because effectively I have a learning disability when it comes to maths.
What is it about it?
If you ask me to do mental arithmetic now, I would really struggle.
Okay.
Complicated formulas, or if I have the formula on a spreadsheet, I'll work things out. If I'm able to write stuff down with a calculator, I'll work it out. Anything to do with mental arithmetic. The thing is, it fools you because if you can do times tables, it's like singing a song. So on the times tables, I could do the times tables because I could remember the word. Yeah, I could remember what comes next in the sentence. If you asked me to turn them around, I'd get lost. So dyscalculia can manifest itself in a number of different ways, and this explains a lot of the boom and bust in my life and things that I learned. Timekeeping. Okay. I have real issues with knowing the passage of time.
Okay.
I will massively underestimate how long a job will take. And again, these are some of the things that you. So aside from physically doing the maths and giving me a maths paper and asking me to work it out, which I would really struggle with, Sudoku is way past me. Cannot do Sudoku at all.
Well, even though there's a pattern and a rhythm.
Even though there's a pattern, it will take me a long time to work them out. Okay. I will do maths on my fingers. Okay. I have calculators for everything. I have spreadsheets where I have to calculate mathematics. I will have, any formulas are already worked out for me. And again, I was in my 50s when I found this out. Wow. And had I known then, or had anybody known then what I now know, the way that I would have learned maths would have been quite different. Contextualising maths is what helps me learn it.
Can you give me an example?
So, when I was a nurse, and obviously there are formulas for certain things. So for example, if you are administering blood to someone and you know the litre of blood needs to go through in so many minutes, you can calculate the drip rate that needs to go through. So if you can put it in context and say, in order to work that out, you need to know this, 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 this.
Okay.
But maths isn't really taught that way. You know, what I was learning was the sum of the square is equal to the something something. That meant nothing. It meant nothing. If someone had said, if you put a ladder against a wall, in order for the ladder not to fall over, it needs to be at a certain angle, and this is how you calculate, then it works. Right, but maths isn't really taught that way. Because
obviously, you were saying you're quite creative. Obviously, the English language and the creativity side of you is coming across quite strongly. But yet, the visualization of the physical math is not there. But if you put it into context, it is there.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's so if you draw pictures, I draw. Everybody who knows me will know my notebooks are full of squiggles and diagrams and pictures and what have you. And if I can put them into a context, then it works very well. Sure. But I don't do any calculations now that I have not worked out 3, 4, 5 or 6 times. Okay. And if you give me a formula and ask me to remember the formula to reuse it later, it just doesn't sink in at all. It doesn't sink in. So dyscalculia, a bit like dyslexia, is a spectrum from very severe to fairly mild, probably not that, whatever. I'm kind of slap bang in the middle of that, where there are some mathematical functions which are fine. I'm not completely illiterate, but it still impairs me. And it's like some of the manifestations are simply time. My husband will say my timekeeping is atrocious. And that's one of because I have no concept of the passage of time.
Wow.
So, but I find that out later, much later in life. I'm not about to go back and do a GCSE just to satisfy myself that I can do one though. It hasn't impaired me from carrying on with my life.
Do you think, has the, I don't want to call it a weakness, but the sort of the level of one, has it affected the other?
I'll tell you what it has affected, and this is again, if you look at the coping mechanism of people who are dyslexic, for example, or have on the spectrum of being dyslexic, we invent other ways to cope with it, which means it's not obvious. Sure. Yeah. And so in my case, when it came to mathematics, I would put things off. I would balancing my finances. So for a long time, I couldn't manage my finances. I would wonder why I would overspend. So this is another one of the things that we overspend. We have no concept of how much money is in the bank. And I boom and bust a lot of times in my life until I found out what was wrong. There were other reasons I overspent. Part of that was making up for other deficiencies in my life. But part of that was also about the physical inability to actually keep track of stuff.
Well, I suppose, if you're trying to mentally budget on a monthly basis, and
you can't count.
As an observer, you kind of see a slight fly in the ointment.
Well, as an observer, you also say, "Oh my God, this woman used to be in charge of multi-million-pound budgets." But thankfully, I had other staff to do that, so I didn't really have to worry. And of course, I've had a business for 20 years. But again, to cope with it, I would have spreadsheets for everything. I would have projections for everything, and even now, I still have. I do calculations based on known formulas that are already written into spreadsheets and calculators and tools that I already use. They help me do that aspect of my job. But if you sat here now and said, let's total up this bill and divide that by 2, I can guarantee that I will get a calculator out and work it out. Sure. Because I can't, the numbers just don't happen.
But your strength can be your weakness can be your strength as well.
Absolutely. I've deferred to much more learned and better people to advise me and keep me right. And when it comes to managing income and cash flow and what have you, I've used a really good accountant. I have my husband who has double A maths and advanced maths and is much better at it than me, and so therefore I could just hold my hands up and go, can you sort that out?
You found a strength for your weakness. There you go.
I found my yin to my yang.
Oh, beautiful. So we've got out of school. Where are we going now?
I bummed around for probably for a year and a half. Okay. I didn't really know. Well, I'd started to think about wanting to be a nurse. Okay. Because I didn't really fancy following my mum into being a cleaner at the post office. Okay. I had a stint as a summer girl working at working at a bar.
Okay.
I couldn't see over the bar, so quite frankly, it was pointless because I couldn't see to pull a pint. I tried various things. I applied for lots of jobs. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. You know, that point, at that age, the world is your oyster, but it's also not your oyster because A, you've got no money. And although my parents, lovely, and they had every ambition for all of us, and they certainly pinned a lot of their hopes and dreams on me because I was supposed to be the gifted one, there was also a bit of pressure, and I rebelled for a little bit. But and then I started applying for nursing jobs.
Were we still quite quiet and introvert, or had that changed a bit?
I was still very introvert.
Okay.
I was still very introvert. It was just one of those. I often preferred my own company, which again sounds very snobby, and people used to think I was very standoffish. But it wasn't that. As I say, I often found myself feeling like the outsider looking in. And often my concepts and my ideas didn't really land with other people around me. I was always still the dreamer. I was always still the big picture person. You know, it was, and the language didn't fit with a lot of the people that I was even hanging around with then, even the girlfriends that I had at the time. You know, there weren't that many. You know, they were talking babies. I was talking conquering the world.
Where were your influences coming from at that point, you know?
Well, let's face it, we didn't have the internet, you know, so, you know, one of the places I always wanted to go was a lifelong ambition. Every time I saw a film that had New York in it, I fancied myself living, you know, on the mean old streets of New York. And yeah, so something bigger. Something bigger. I've said this before when I've run some of my own workshops. Up to a point in my life, I felt a wee bit like the princess in the tower.
Okay.
You know, waiting for the Prince Charming to come and rescue her.
Sure.
And so there was always a dream. There was this dream. I don't know what the dream really was, but it was kind of there was something different. There was something better.
Okay.
But I didn't really know what it was. So the reason I bummed her out is I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I remember speaking to one of the careers advisors. I think the careers office at the time was on May Street in Belfast, as I remember. And I spoke to the careers advisor, and they started saying, well, with your qualifications, you know, why don't you look at the care sector?
Okay.
That or secretarial jobs, because I did have shorthand course at that stage, so it was like secretarial job or whatever. I did a stint for about 2 days at a solicitor's office in Belfast with a wee old man who was probably the age of Moses. And he just came out.
Dust off him.
He just came out and spent all this time shouting, and my desk was right opposite his door because that's where the junior sat, and I lasted a week, and I just like, oh God, no, I can't do this. Mum went mental, and I said, but I've applied for other jobs. But so I started to apply for nursing jobs. It was one of those, I thought, yeah, I quite fancy that. I'll do that. I got a few kick in the teeth because I didn't have the maths, but then when the job came in, and I was thrilled to be starting a career. But it also meant that I moved out, and that was part of the draw that I wanted. That I had to live in the nurses' home for 12 months anyway. So packed my bags at 17 and a half and moved out.
Wow.
And up to a point, that was kind of my escape.
Sure. That makes sense. How was family life when you left?
Fractured. Again, mum and dad immensely proud, but they still had major issues of their own. And by that stage, my dad's drinking wasn't just as frequent because he was cracking on. But yeah, there were still flare-ups.
Sure.
But now they were on their own because all of us had left home at that point.
Get out of Dodge.
And in a way, I felt a bit guilty because it felt like I was leaving my mum.
Sure.
But it was my time to go and do something else.
So 17 and a half, we're off, bags packed, down to the nurses.
Down to the nurses' home. Convinced my eldest brother to do a guarantor for a loan for a motorbike. That was my next bit of rebellion. Because I needed transport. Because I didn't fancy bussing it up and down on Ulster bus from Purdysburn to home. So he did a guarantor loan for me at the time, and I had a blue Kawasaki it was a 125.
Wow.
And it was freedom. It was brilliant. I loved it. And then I did my bike test, and motorbikes became a passion.
Wow.
Still are.
So it's associated with freedom and getting away.
Yeah, it was. I could get on the bike and go where I wanted and do what I wanted. And
did women do that?
Did they in those days? Well, yeah, 1982. Yeah, well, we did.
Yeah.
I mean, there weren't that many women that I could see on motorbikes, but there were a few in the hospital,
sure.
So that was quite good.
I was going to say, how did your mother take it? That's generally the litmus test.
Well, again, horrified. Mum and Dad were horrified because my brother and my dad had had an accident on a bike.
Okay.
And so when I came home, and my brother had already told my mum that he'd guaranteed the loan, I think she went a bit mental. But I was thrilled. I was absolutely in my element, and I adored that bike. I had seen it in the glossy magazines, and I'm having a new one. And because I had no real debt, I had no debt at all, because I was earning as a student nurse, but I had no real outgoings. So
you were the unexpected gift. You were protected. You were taken away.
Yeah, and then I just kicked them in the teeth.
Accelerated, and then you zoom out of town on a blue Kawasaki bike.
I did. I just disappeared. That was right. I went off. And I loved it. And again, that taste of freedom. And there I am in the hospital, and independent, with a pile of other younger folk, people my own age. Again, all left home as well. So we were all in the same boat.
Sure.
We were protected because we were in the nurses' home.
Yeah.
And the two wardens, one was called Miss Fox. That tells you what she was like. She was like the mother hen. So we'd 3.5 years of training then to do.
So was that general training or general?
I did my state enrolled nurse first, and then I took the mental health route because mathematics meant I couldn't go and do the whatever. I eventually did.
Bloody maths is back in here again.
Maths kicked me in the teeth again. I did my RGN training, but only when I moved to England. So I carried on and did my mental health nurse training. Met my husband.
Mm-hmm.
That was another bit of rebellion, because whilst my mum and dad were, my dad was a Protestant, my mum was a Catholic.
Okay.
And before the war, that wasn't a big issue.
Sure.
And then when I got married, I married a Catholic, and that threw the cat right among the pigeons.
What were you brought up?
Protestant.
Protestant, okay.
So that really did throw them all for a loop. Everybody was very dead set against it.
It's kind of ironic, is it not?
It very much is. I thought if anybody would understand, it would be my parents. And I understand now why they didn't understand, because of course, we were in turmoil again. It was the 1980s. Everybody got to be very careful. Everybody's watching everybody's back.
Sure.
And when I got married, the day after we got married, we moved to England.
Okay.
Because we had some very unsavoury characters threaten our lives as a result of getting married.
Oh wow.
So we had the whole, what the hell? It's 1980 odd. What are we playing at? It was 1986. And I literally, the day after I got married, we were on the boat and landed in Liverpool, and I had a new job starting in Manchester.
Wow. Just like that.
So conflict drove me away again. God damn it.
On that boat again.
Can you see this? What did I say about addiction? That you repeat the same pattern in your life of conflict and trauma and resolution and what have you.
Get away and get back.
Yeah, there's a wee theme for you.
Sure. So what age are you married?
21.
21, wow.
And nobody could tell me otherwise.
Wow.
I specialised in my career very early on. So when I came to England, although I was a mental health nurse, sorry I tell a lie, although I did my general training, I worked at Manchester Royal Infirmary, decided that I really didn't like it very much, and I got a chance to later on work in an addictions unit. So I basically left Manchester Royal Infirmary and went to work at Salford in the addictions unit there, and I felt like I'd come home.
Wow.
So although the nursing bit I loved, and taking care of people, it's an old cliche, taking care of people and looking after their welfare and looking after their families and all the nurturing bit, that in me that was the bit, I guess, I felt sometimes I lacked. Not that my parents didn't love me or nurture me, but you know, you're selfish when you're a kid.
Yeah, of course.
You think the whole world owes you something. So it brought out in me something that I really liked. But the mental health bit helped me slot a lot into place that I think I'd been looking for. And if I say that to some extent was the start of my personal development.
Sure.
Because to be a specialist nurse in addictions, and again, no surprise there that it ended up being addictions and trauma. Here am I, having been the product of addictions and trauma. It helped me understand some of my own patterns, and it helped me resolve my feelings for my parents, and it helped me resolve feelings about my own life. But it took time.
Sure.
But in a way, it was the best thing that could have happened. So again, there's no surprise, there's no mistake. It was destined to be.
I'll ask a very potentially basic question. Mental health and addictions, are they always associated with each other?
They're not always associated per se, but again, it depends on if you. A lot of schools of thought believe physically in an addiction being an illness. So, for example, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous believe that it is an illness, a lifelong illness. You don't recover from it, you learn how to manage it. In sort of psychotherapy terms, although there are physical elements of addiction, you know, where you can physically become addicted, in which case you become ill when you no longer have that substance, whether it's alcohol or some drugs. It's the psychological elements that are the hardest thing to overcome.
Right.
Now, for me, where that resolves, and we talk about business, and we talk about our own personal journey, once we realise that a lot of the patterns that we play out in our lives are basically psychological patterns, and once we see them, you can't unsee them. So again, for me, the thing that was not just useful for me as a therapist in dealing with people, but part of becoming a therapist, part of becoming a specialist nurse, is understanding your own patterning, your own conditioning, your own little hang-ups, your own stuff. You've got to work a lot on yourself to be able to physically help other people.
Sure.
And I realised that where my addiction had played out had been, you know, in trauma, in conflict, in fear, in not feeling good enough, and you know what I mean. I'd played those songs over and over and over again in my life. I just didn't realise that that's what I was doing. And so through that process of becoming a professional in that field, it helped to open me up to.
Sure.
I don't really have to play that song. I can choose another one.
Yeah. Just out of interest, what was your earliest memory?
My earliest memory is of being, I don't know what age it would have been, but I would have been a child in my mother's arms, and she was standing facing our front window in our house in Belfast, and she was rocking me from side to side. That's the earliest memory that I have.
So you're less than one?
I would say probably less than one, but it could have been between sort of 1 and 2.
Okay.
But that would be that feeling of just being rocked side to side whilst looking out the window.
Happy memory, no feeling?
Oh no, good, no fear, no ever, quite warm and fuzzy, and you know, as you imagine the child should feel.
So, Salford Addictions Unit. It is, excuse my ignorance, the addictions unit, does it specialise at all, or is it's addiction all?
It's addiction in general, so it would be alcohol and drugs. We actually had some people there who had sexual addictions. Okay. So my experience, my professional qualifications span drugs and alcohol, trauma, because often a lot of people, like my dad, use drug and alcohol to deal with mental health problems. They don't realise that's what they're doing, but they find an outlet to cope with the symptoms that they have. And so when you say about mental health and addiction going hand in hand, often people who have very deeply entrenched mental health problems, so don't necessarily mean schizophrenia, but even low levels of anxiety and depression and what have you, will often turn to drugs and alcohol in order to cope with the overwhelming feelings they have. So that is very much well documented.
So it's a symptom, not a cause?
It's a symptom, not a cause.
Okay. So, thank you. That makes sense. And
I specialised early on. And once again, as a result, here's another thing. Because I specialised early on in my career, I got a chance to go back to university.
Well.
Obviously as an adult, I was fast-tracked through the NHS because I was considered to be
Smarty pants.
I was young, much younger than my compatriots.
Okay.
So
what age were you?
I would have been 27, and I got a chance. I got a chance to go back to university.
Yeah.
I was sponsored by the NHS to do it.
Wow.
And I spent full time doing that, and was summarily loathed by the people in the class because all of them were senior managers with in excess of 5 or 6 years, and I had a year.
Wow. So you were straight through again?
I was back in school.
Seen this pattern before?
Very much so. And it came out one day in the class because we were actually doing a discussion about life experience and how therapists use life experience sometimes in the right context to help other people.
Sure.
And one of the people in the class, it happened to be a man, when we were sharing what age we were, and we got to me, and I was 27 and he was 37, and he had literally his breath kind of left him, and the tutor in the class said, "Does that make you feel indifferent towards Trish at this point?" And he went, "Yeah, I want to know by what right she's here."
Well.
And I thought, "You bastard." Can I say that?
Yeah, say what you want. Well, so once again, you're grand. So yeah, you're at that point, it's 27, you're again fish out of water.
I actually, at that point though, my mindset had changed because what I was thinking was, F you. Who are you? Because I'm a chronological age that doesn't fit your view of the world. Here we are as therapists on a specialist course to take us further in our career, where bringing all this stuff out is something we need to deal with. Now you're telling me you're now prejudiced because you don't believe that at my age I can have sufficient life experience to be of value.
Well.
Having not known anything of my history. And rather than kind of go, you know, I'm really sorry I'm here and I shouldn't be here and by what right am I here, at that stage I think I just had changed. I think the other part, the stoic part of me was there. I was kind of like, okay, but I can deal with this. But there was also the FU coming in. And it was like, you have no idea of my story.
Sure.
Because I believe stories are very powerful.
Yeah.
And at that stage I was beginning to more embrace who I was and where I was from, and more importantly, where I thought I was going. I was still dreaming.
Makes sense, yeah. Well, no, why not? I mean, you're obviously sort of starting to get your own strength at that point, you know?
Yeah, and yeah, I'm not saying there aren't chinks in the armour, there are. But I was also quite driven.
Sure.
So back to this addiction. So now I had become that other thing that addiction sometimes is, where you are driven to the thing, to the quest.
Sure.
For whatever the thing is, you know, whether it's drugs or alcohol or fame or fortune or whatever. So that had started to emerge as a character trait, which eventually would also come back to bite me.
Yeah. So what's happening then at this point?
At this point, I'm still married, although soon not to be.
Okay.
I left. I finished my course. I finished the course with a distinction, which pissed everybody because I came top of the class. Yay! And when I got back, I was instantly promoted, which also pissed people off in the unit that I was in. But then I became a nurse specialist in addiction. So I went from being a sort of staff nurse or senior nurse in addictions to becoming what's called what nowadays would be called a nurse consultant. I was the youngest nurse consultant in the country at that time, at 28.
Wow, eh?
And I had a responsibility for, along with 2 other colleagues, we covered the whole of the northwest of England as nurse specialists in addictions.
Did you find yourself, I mean, were you in flow at that point? I mean, were you in the right place?
Yeah, I loved it. I loved it. We got to advise lots of other new drug teams that were being set up. So the whole of the UK was going through massive change in terms of drugs and alcohol. Local community drug teams were being set up, and we were at the forefront of setting them up. We had responsibility for providing specialist external support to new drug teams. So I was right there at the kind of beginning of the implementation of drug policy in the UK. It was really exciting times.
Yeah. So, up then? What's happening? We're travelling around the country.
We're travelling around the country, and my husband, I had a baby, my beloved son Connor, and 18 months later, my marriage fell to pieces because of me. It didn't sit well with my. I've got to be careful how I say this, but it didn't always sit well with my now ex-husband.
Okay.
That I think that I was successful.
Okay.
Very successful. And he was successful in his role, but having more children wasn't really on my agenda.
Okay.
And there were a whole lot of other reasons as well. But the marriage fell to bits. And I was left with a 14% mortgage in negative equity. So
14%, were we early 90s now?
This was 1990.
1990.
This was, 1991, coming into 92 actually. So the baby, Connor, was 18 months old.
What size is your mortgage?
At the time, £45,000, which doesn't sound like a lot.
At 14% in 1991-ish?
Yeah,
wow.
It was a lot of money.
Yeah.
So we went from being relatively affluent, because there were two of us, down to, holy crap, I'm now in serious debt. And moved out. My mum and dad had moved to Liverpool at that stage. Sorry, my dad had died, tell a lie. My dad died the year before. And mum was still there, so I moved in with my mum, but I was having to drive to Liverpool every day to come back to Manchester for my job, and I did that for I think 8 months. So I had 2 jobs. I would drop the baby off at nursery, go and do my day's work. At that stage I was then the senior manager of a drug and alcohol team, so I now have my own team. And I was shattered, because no matter how much money, back to dyscalculia, couldn't manage my finances, negative equity, big mortgage, marriage falling apart. So in spite of the fact that having a nice job and mum saying, look how great my daughter's doing, I had too much month at the end of the money. And I would do 2 jobs. I think I weighed about 6.5 stone at that stage. And life was just horrendous.
And your father passed away in the middle of all this as well?
Passed away in the middle of all.
What age were you?
27.
Wow.
20, no, tell a lie. What age was Connor? Yeah, 27. So Dad died just before Connor was born.
Well, so marriage is over. You're back living with mum.
I'm living with mum. Trauma. I'm living with my mother, and that was fractious and difficult. And then I found, miraculously, I think I told you this story in the pub. So shall I tell this story? My worst memory of that time. I mean, it's difficult enough breaking up. My ex-husband is a lovely man. We just were destined to stay together. It was me who did it. He did absolutely nothing wrong. It was my decision. It was where I was at. It was whatever it was I was searching for. I have no idea. But I had a day when I went into Manchester. I had to go into Manchester. I dropped the baby off at nursery. I stopped at the multi-storey car park in the Arndale in Manchester, and this day is forever embellished in my mind. And I went to the Santander branch. I think the Santander branch is still there on Cross Street. Put my card in the hole in the wall. And
this would have been Abbey at the time, would it?
Would have been Abbey. It would have been Abbey National, of course it would have been. And there, no money came out, and I knew I'd been paid that day, which was a bit weird. And I walked into the branch, and the branch was full and bustling and what have you, and there were no, the barriers you have nowadays. That didn't happen in those days. And I asked, to see somebody, because I said I don't understand, the card's not working. The teller went away with my card into the back to have a check, and then came back out. But she walked round the counter and came to see me and said, we understand that you've recently separated. And I said, how on earth do you know that? Well, your ex-husband or your husband, and I corrected her and said he's not my ex-husband. He's been in touch, and he's basically said that we need to change the bank account, and we can't let you have any money, and really we'd respectfully like you to go and bank somewhere else. And I was not just gobsmacked, I mean, I was horrified that everybody was listening to this. I was also panic stricken because I had a £5 left in my pocket. I'd parked my car in the Arndale, and I said, so what am I supposed to do now? And she said, well, I can't really help you. And she didn't just take the card off me, because she had it anyway, but she cut it up in front of me and everybody else. And I was totally, absolutely, holy crap, what the hell. So with tears in my wee eyes, I ran out and I managed to get back to my car just in time, because I think it was a quid or whatever. Thinking I've no diesel in the car. I drove a Citroen was it a Volcan? It was one of those at the time. It was a nice car. I loved it.
What colour?
It was like an anthracite grey.
Oh, very good.
And I was driving back to the nursery to pick Connor up from nursery, and I drove through Prestwich and drove past the Barclays Bank, which was an old building, still there as far as I remember, and I thought, I've got to stop and open a bank account. And so I parked up. I left the car in WL Lines because I couldn't afford the car park payments, and went into the bank. I spoke to the teller at the back of the thing, and by the look on my face, I just said, I need to open a bank account, like right now. I don't know what to do, but kind of this is what happened. And she obviously read the look on my face and called someone. I said, someone with you in a minute.
Yeah. And
this big tall man, as tall as you are, a good 6 footers odd, came walking out. He looked like, who did I say he looked like when I was talking earlier on? The guy who does It'll Be Alright in the Night. Dennis Norden.
Dennis Norden, yes.
He looked like Dennis Norden with big, thick, massive glasses, big Magnum PI tash. And he strode across and he said, what can I do for you? And I could barely get the words out before I started in tears. And he took me into a little side room and he just said, just what's going on? And I told him the whole story. I blethered for about 3/4 of an hour before I could get to the end of the story. And he just said, what do you need? And that was in the time when you could speak to a human being and they could make decisions on the day. And I said, I think I need about 250 quid now. He rang the hospital to confirm that I was an employee. He set up a bank account. They gave me an overdraft of £1,000.
There and then?
Just there and then.
Wow.
On the strength of the word of someone in a personnel department, gave me £250 cash and just said, just let me know, call back in the next couple of days, we'll have your new bank card ready, your bank account set up. And I was able to get back home. And that was, there are pivotal moments in your life that sometimes they are the worst possible day, but they're also the best possible day. And forever I will remember the name of Peter Coppock because he was amazing.
Wow. That's quite something to come to that at that point.
I can still get emotional.
I can feel that.
He was an angel. But again, I don't feel sad about that moment. The right people come into your life, Peter, when you call for help. And he was one of those. And again, from then, it just gave me the resolve that no matter how bad it got, that something good comes through in your life if you just trust enough, and if you just open up enough. And that was one of those moments. On the strength of that overdraft, I found a little place near to where I worked. It was Edenfield, so I could be in work in 20 minutes. And this was another one of those pivotal moments because I found the listing at the back of a very old copy of the Bury Times. The Bury Times. While I was eating the fish and chips. And it said 2-bedroom cottage in conservation area. Again, I can remember it word for word. Ready now, 250 quid deposit. I'm like,
there you go.
Oh my God.
The universe is talking.
Rang up this guy, big bear of a man. He was ginormous. His name was Michael Flynn. You could not get more Irish. And he showed me the place. It was ramshackle, but it was in a beautiful area. It hadn't been lived in for a couple of years. It had no work done to it. And I saw there were slug trails on the floor.
Lovely.
There was mould on the windows, but across the street was a children's nursery. And the day that I saw that place, I told my mum, just hold everything. I need to drive back. I need to go and see this property, and if it's right, I'll take it. I had 250 quid in my hand, and I knocked on the door of the nursery and I said, "Is there any chance you have some places available?" And she said, "No." I said, "Well, I'm just looking at the place across the way." And I had another frazzled day. I looked like hell, and I had tears in my eyes. And this lady was called Janice Johnson. And Janice took the baby out of my arms, and she said, "We'll go and see the house then."
Well.
And that was it. I saw the house. I gave Mike Flynn 250 quid. I said, "I'll take it." There was no tenancy agreement. I don't know how we did it. Anyway, there's no real tenancy agreement. It was just a handshake, and he just said, "Move in." And Janice virtually brought my son up for the next 13 years.
Wow.
And I just believe, again, 100% I believe that sometimes the right things happen out of the wrong circumstances.
You ended up buying that house?
It was funny because we were talking about lease options. I love the house. I said to Mike, I will do everything to this house. I will change the bathroom, I'll change the kitchen, I'll fix the windows, I'll do everything. But I don't want to be in the situation ever again where I can't, that I can't stay somewhere that I want to stay here forever. But I can't buy this house because I have a £45,000 mortgage on a house that's now worth 25 with a ridiculous interest rate. And is there any chance that if you decide to sell this house that you'd at least sell it to me?
Sure.
And he said, we can come to some arrangement. I was hoping he wasn't thinking about one of those type of arrangements. And true to his word, 3 years and 6 months later, he sold me the house. Even telling, I have to be careful, even telling the solicitor that I had, over the period of the 3 years, given him the equivalent of a £10,000 deposit.
Wow.
And that was one of those. And I stayed in that house then for 13 years.
Wow.
And my son and I met Gary while I was there.
That would be, what is that now known as, sort of a tenant buyer?
That would be a tenant buyer. So there you go. I did a tenant buyer in let's think what year it would be then.
1994.
94.
Yeah. Oh, right. You were well ahead of your time?
I think I was. I've just landed. It was desperation. It was out of desperation.
But you asked for help too, and you were getting...
Yeah, I'd begun to open myself up more. That, being down on your luck. My finances were in an absolute state. I was easily, by that stage, I was easily £40,000 or £50,000 in debt.
Right.
And I could see absolutely no way of getting out of it, even with the job that I had. And I was coming to the end, when we got to the back end of 1998, I was really... I'd left the NHS at that point. I got the chance to take redundancy because I hated the job. I hated the politics that went with the job. I didn't hate the job, but I hated the politics. And I was made redundant. I got 12 grand. Whoa, that was barely enough to pay the bills. And I ended up in Wigan. I ended up in the education department in Wigan. This is because this is your life, isn't it? God, you have to edit this into 14 episodes.
That's what it's all about. So Wigan?
I was made redundant. I left my job in September. I was bank nursing, so at least I had bank nursing, so I could go out and get a shift and put food on the table. I obviously had a wee bit of money in the bank. We'd sold the original house at this stage. Okay, you and your ex-husband? But there was a £20,000 black hole. Right. Which we had to settle, and because I had the better job at that point, I was the one settling it. I had a new partner then, we were in the process of getting set up like you do. But I had no idea what I was going to do. Sure. Looking around for another job, but I didn't really want to go back to doing nursing. Although I left as a senior manager, it was great. My mum thought it was great. When I told her I was being made redundant, she was absolutely horrified. Really? Absolutely horrified. But I there was something else. You know,
Sure.
I said that thing about come back, and there was something else. There's something else. I don't know what the something else is, but there's something else. And then I saw a job. Drug and alcohol jobs were advertised in The Guardian on a Wednesday.
Oh, wow, okay.
And I flicked through, and there was a job advertised in Wigan, and it was with the education department, and I wasn't a teacher, although I had done a nurse teaching qualification at that stage. But I had no idea whether I'd be a candidate for it. The only difference was that it was running a multi-agency partnership around drugs and alcohol education.
Okay.
I thought, drugs and alcohol, sounds like me. I've got a nurse teaching qualification, sounds like me. It's a bloody good salary. It's a bit further away than I wanted to be, but however, I'm going to go for it and see what happens.
Sure.
So I applied for that job, I think almost immediately after I left the NHS, and got an interview in December, can't remember what date it was, and walked into a room to actually find, it was really weird, a lot of the people from the drug and alcohol teams where I had been the nurse specialist, they were in the room.
Wow. There
was loads of the people that had gone for the same job, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing here? Including some teachers that I knew. Well, I thought, there's no chance I'm getting this job, because these guys are eminently more qualified for this. They've been teachers, they've taught drugs and alcohol, you know, to kids. But this wasn't about teaching it to kids, this was actually running the partnership.
Right.
Where I thought, well, what's the worst could happen? I'm unemployed anyway.
Sure.
And it was the hardest interview I think I've ever done. It was a whole day thing. It was like a Miss World competition, you know, there was like panels, and then you went out, and then at lunchtime they came in with a big book, and it was like, we're going to read these names, and like, can some of you just join us? And that was the cut.
Wow.
So we sat in the room, and I'm quaking in my little boots. And they read out the names, and we had to leave and go into the other room.
So your name's called
then
out?
Then they left. And we're all in this room, and none of us know what's going on at this stage.
Are you in or you're out?
Then are you in or out? And the Director of Education, Bob Clark, who, again, another angel in my life, came in and he said, you lot progress to this afternoon's interviews. The afternoon interviews were just as tough, if not more so, because we had stuff we've got to do on the hoof. You've got to provide a strategy. You've got to provide a rationale for that strategy. Thankfully, there was no maths involved. Otherwise, we'd been completely buggered.
Yeah.
But it was very much vision.
Sure.
And the one thing that I love, and it was about, you know, my whole theme was about people and vision. And when we'd finished, and it was exhausting, and it was night, and I was about to get back in the car, I couldn't drive because my head was buzzing. I walked up Wigan Town Centre, a thing called Standish Gate. I bought a pasty. Apparently that's what you do in Wigan.
Do you remember what type of pasty?
It was a Wigan pasty. It was a meat potato pasty, but it's done in a Wigan style, which is a bit floppy, and it's not what we would call a pasty.
Okay.
Walked back down to get my car just to clear my head, because I can't drive home. I know Gary was waiting at home with bated breath, hoping that I'd got a job, because I had no idea how we were going to survive. And I was about to get in the car, which was parked outside the education department, and this little voice was calling me, Trish, Trish, Trish. And I looked round, and it's Bob Clark, the Director of Education, waving out the door at me. And I went, oh, hi Bob, I'm just about to leave. And he went, can you just come over for a minute? And I went, oh God, please don't tell me I've not got the job to my face, because I'll just burst out crying. And he asked me to come back in to the offices where we just had the last big panel interview, and I walked in, and there's this big table, there's like 14 people, all the panellists were sitting around the table. Obviously they were making their decision, and I just thought, if he tells me in front of all these people that I've not got this job, I'm just going to make a fool out of myself. And he said, we can't believe our luck that you were getting in the car.
Wow.
And he said, Madeline spotted you and said, just getting in the car there she is. And he said, we'd like to offer you the job. Well, you couldn't knock me down with a feather, because I thought, how the hell did I get this job? And he said, and even better, he says, because I know you're between jobs, he said, would you like to represent us at a national conference next week?
Wow.
And we'll pay you as a consultant just to do that for the day until we process all your application. Please tell that you still want the job. And I'm like, holy shit, yeah, of course I do.
Did you still have the pasty at this point?
I think the pasty had fallen on the floor. So I got that job, and against all of the odds, or against at least the paper odds,
sure,
I got that job. And I worked for Wigan for 4 years. I ran the partnership for 4 years. I got to do some brilliant jobs as part of that. I got to work with some amazing people. I put the team together. I launched the whole strategy. And again, that was back to my passion for developing people. And that's carried me through. I think that's been the theme throughout my whole life. And then I did that for 4 years. Bob Clark, bless him, gave me a chance to go and work for the Department for Education and Skills as a part-time consultant, but leading up a big project. And I did that for 6 months, and he said, I know you're going to leave. And he wanted me to leave, not in a bad way, but he just said, it's your time. And as a result of that, I had to replace myself for 2.5 days a week. And after 6 months, I came back and I said, you know I've got to go now. And he went, yeah. And I set up my consulting business, and I ran my consulting business for 10 years. So now that brings us to property. So I ran a company called Farrell Dixon Associates, set it up from scratch. We consulted on some of the biggest drug and alcohol projects in the UK.
Wow.
Did a lot of work on drugs and crime for the Home Office. My mum was thrilled, in spite of the fact that she was very worried about my career prospects.
Sure. So you're running your own business.
My own business.
Big projects, big names, working for the government.
Big money. Big everything. And then I went and messed it all up.
Oh. You were doing so well.
I was doing so well. That whole thing came back. So in spite of the prestige, in spite of the experience, in spite of the knowledge, in spite of the everything, the hours were long, because as a consultant doing those type of projects, they want you, even though I had a team, and I had a team of consultants who worked for me. I headed up projects. I had to be there, committee meetings and the NHS, and committee meetings in the Department for Education and Skills all go hand in hand. They love a committee meeting. The pivotal night for me was a 4 o'clock in the morning start to get to London for a meeting, which lasted about an hour and a half. And I then had to get a train from there to Wolverhampton for another meeting. And then I had to get a train from there to Liverpool for another meeting. Then I was starting to get involved in property, because I wanted to build a pension for myself.
Sure.
And I went to a property meet. Then I had to get back to Preston. Then I had to get back home. And that had been a series of a number of weeks like that, where I didn't see my partner, as he was husband then. I certainly didn't see my son. And I had all the trappings of success and wealth, and all of those things that we see on Instagram. The cars, the house, the holidays, the watches, the jewellery, I had all that. But I was completely devoid of joy. And having got back home that night, there wasn't a pivotal moment. You know what I mean? We talk about sometimes a thing that breaks you. I just think it was a series of things that night. And I think I got back home. It was a ridiculous time. Anyway, it was almost 24 hours on the road.
Wow.
I was a danger to myself and everybody else. I had no idea how I got back home. I can't remember it. But at some point in the middle of that night, something inside me just broke. And I just decided life was pointless, meaningless, empty. And if this is what it was going to be like, I didn't want to be here anymore. So I took myself very gingerly downstairs and tried to hang myself.
Wow.
And I was insane. Having been a mental health nurse, I can say at that point I had gone completely insane, lost perspective. But I'd lost hope. I think I'd thought all of this stuff is not real. And it was one of those things that people say sometimes you get a real pivotal. I've had lots of pivotal moments. But in terms of my own joy and what I was doing with my life, so even though I was buying property at that time, I'd started to use my excess money to buy property as my pension, but none of it was good enough.
Sure.
None of it was right. None of it was fulfilling. All of it was problems, and it was soulless. And at that point, I tried to hang myself. But at the point when I almost lost consciousness, I had this wee voice. And I don't care whether anybody believes it, doesn't believe it otherwise, but this is how it happened. I'm pretty certain I was almost past the point of no return. And I heard a voice, and that voice said, "You've no right. You've no right to do this."
Wow.
And so all of the energy that I could summon in my little legs, and I don't know how I did it. I managed to stand up and somehow it was a belt, somehow unhook the belt, which had now tightened quite a lot around the neck. And I had ligature marks on my neck for 10 days afterwards. And I didn't get up and poop glitter and fart rainbows the next day and suddenly life was great. It was a long, slow recovery. But it made me decide to change my business completely and my life completely.
Wow.
And to stop doing the things that I thought were to not just impress me but to impress others. It's like, who was I trying to prove value? And over the space of the next 2 years, I started to close down the consultancy business. I brought in a friend of mine who was doing consultancy work for me and put her at the front of the business so I could do less.
Sure.
And effectively more than halved my income overnight. And my mum was again horrified. Like, why is enough not enough for you? And I just said, this isn't what life is. And it changed me. It fundamentally changed everything.
Sure.
So what I thought I knew up to that point, I realised I knew absolutely diddly squat about life and about happiness and about success and about whatever. I couldn't handle the success that I had. And so, a bit like an addict, enough's not enough. The high is never the right high. You have to hit the bottom. And I did.
Do you know where that guidance or support came from? Do you have any
I just
idea?
think there was a part of me that was just crying out. It was almost like, you know, that bit of you that sometimes you say it's like your own essence to say what that voice was. Do I believe in a guardian angel? I believe in a higher power, whatever that higher power is. And I believe at that moment that's what I needed to hear.
Sure.
But I also needed to believe, and I do believe this fundamentally, that however bad it gets, again, that you can change it. Does that mean you have to find the fortitude to do it? And I didn't believe at the time that I had.
Sure.
But when I heard the word "you have no right," I realised I didn't. I owed it to my son. I owed it to my partner. You know.
Yeah.
It's not my life. It is my life, but it's not my life to take.
And as an observer at that time, what would we have seen?
You'd have seen someone who, on the surface, was what I said to you before. As a child, growing up in the environment I grew up in, we learned how to play a role. So when the morning came, the pretty face was on. I call myself pretty then, do you realise that? You know, the pretty face was on, the happy face was on, the smiley face was on. Everybody saw the Trish that they expected to see. There were no tears after bedtime. There was no, this is what I tried to do. I didn't tell anybody. The only obvious thing would have been there were some marks on my neck, which I passed off as having a play fight with the boys, you know, my son and Gary's son. And that was relatively plausible. And I was ashamed and I was embarrassed and I was guilty and I was all of those things. I couldn't forgive myself for a long time. But in actual fact, that's what I needed. I needed to forgive myself for not being perfect. Sure. Because I was still trying to get my maths homework right. I was still trying to do the maths homework and still messing it up. It still wasn't enough, in spite of all the effort. And it changed me. But it changed me so much for the better. God Almighty, absolutely 100% changed me for the better.
What age were you then?
I would have been 32, 33.
Wow.
But yeah, to all intents and purposes, the nice car, the nice house, the nice holidays, the nice, the Instagram kind of image. I could have painted that Instagram image for anybody. I could have taken them around. You know, we had 2 offices. We had staff. I had a letting agency. I had an estate agency. I had a property portfolio. I had money. I had. If it's one of those, I had everything, but I had nothing. And that's the thing, when you have the things and you realise the things don't make up for the things that you don't have inside. And once I'd made the decision, and I'm stuck by the decision, it was to do the things that I really wanted to do, to be the person I really wanted to be. that was what made the change. It's what made me better in business, because I could see the patterns I was repeating. I was too busy trying to impress everybody else instead of working on myself. I was too busy trying to be what other people wanted me to be instead of being myself. Too busy projecting an image instead of being myself. And I thought, well, if I can't actually be honest with people, is this what I want my life to be like? Do I want to play the role the way I played the role all through my life? Do I want to play that game? Because actually the person that is hurting is me. And I decided not to do that anymore. It hurt like hell on the finances, by the way, because it really kiboshed things for a long time. You know, but it was the right decision.
How did Mum take it?
Mum, God bless her, my mum, to the day she died, did not know that I tried to kill myself. I couldn't do that to her, because I know how she suffered in her life, and I didn't want to do that to her. So she didn't know. She just knew that I decided not to do consultancy work anymore, and she knew that I was involved in property. And you know, obviously when I gave up my consultancy business, my ability to buy property had changed, because I'd sacked off my property business, my consultancy business, which is where all the money was. So that's when I learned lease options, because I'd run out of cash. So I learned other strategies, which actually suited me better, because it meant I didn't have to do the whole 25% BMV, let's just kick everybody's legs from under them. And it brought into the property world, for me anyway, the bits that I loved, which was talking to people. And looking at where their pain was. Because in their pain, I could see my own.
So it's almost, they've got a problem, they've got a property, there's common ground here.
There's a lot of common ground. And the stories that they would tell, again, because people would open up to me because they could relate. So the more that I was honest, the more that I was open, the more that I was telling people how I understood their pain financially. My finances were in the toilet. I couldn't open the letters. Every time I speak to someone who's being repossessed, I can remember how it feels. Every time I speak to someone who said, I have no money left at the end of this month to pay this bill, I know how it feels. It's not academically I know how it feels, I know how it feels. I know what patterns they'll follow in their decision making, because I know how that feels. And that makes me a better person, a better business person. And it appeals more to who I am.
Sure. We're not having the nothing, having the letter, not opening the envelopes, head in sand.
Yeah, not even knowing what the figures are. What did I say? Just calculate. I knew there was a hole. I didn't always know how big the hole was.
Sure. So lease options, way forward?
They're not the thing for everything.
But for you at that time,
I was cynical.
Sure.
Because it was not that I didn't believe, I understood the concept. And it reminded me of how I bought my first house. So I liked the idea. There was a lot of hype, there was a lot of talk, there weren't that many trainers, certainly not as many as nowadays. And I researched some people, and one name kept cropping up. And when I saw photographs of other people that I knew at that event, I thought, well, that's the one I'm going to go and learn from. I don't regret for a minute learning from the person that I've learned from, even though up to a point there's a bit of a black shadow over him now, or there has been. But I was glad that I invested in myself. I'd done the other property strategies. We'd done some commercial stuff. We'd done some HMOs. We'd done some ordinary buy-to-let stuff. I'd bought stuff at auction. I could tell people a lot of stuff about property. At that stage, I'd been involved in property for about 6 years. So I had some track record. And that's where I met a lot of people. I met Stephen from PPA. And I'm glad I invested.
Sure.
I did the usual thing. Let's go to the weekend event and see what it's all about. And up to a point, I sat at the back thinking, I'm pretty sure this is
arms
all bullshit.
crossed.
But by the end, I was thinking, I like this. In some of these stories, I can see me, and it resonated, and the people resonated, and the concept resonated, and the way of doing it resonated, and of course financially it resonated.
Sure.
Because I was in the process of shutting down my consulting business. And I thought, I can't really go to the bank now and say, can you give me some more mortgage, please? Because I'm about to sacrifice the thing that's been keeping the machine running.
Yeah.
But the rest is history. I'm glad I learned that strategy. I went out, and within 6 weeks of the first 3-day course that I did, even before I'd done any additional training, I got my first 2 deals signed up, and I was thinking, holy crap, how did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
And I never had to sell anybody anything. I talked to them in a way that I wanted someone to talk to me when I was in distress.
Sure.
Except the reason nobody talked to me when I was in distress is because I didn't open up.
Mm.
You know, but I learned how to use what I know for people to want to trust me. And that's ultimately what we all want. We want to open up to somebody, but we need to find the right person to do that with. So I was able to bring all of that into it. And that's probably why what I do now is so much more fulfilling.
So what do you do now for the benefit of everyone listening?
Clearly I still invest in property. My passion is still people. It always has been. It's the constant. I still do small business consulting, but I love small businesses now. People like myself, people who are going around the treadmill, want to get off it. People who they can see there's something else, they just don't know what the something else is, and they need some clarity on that. Or frankly, people who are circling the drain and they need someone to throw down a wee rope and say, the way out's up here. We all have things that we can do. But the one thing I would say to anybody listening, you know, is back to that thing, whether or not you're feeling completely at the end of your tether, you need to pivot and go a different direction. Allow yourself sometimes the ability to say, this isn't for me. Just because someone else is making a shitload of money at it, doesn't mean to say this is for me. Because as long as you carry on and believe in yourself and find a way, you will find the right thing eventually. You don't have to have a great big life purpose. You don't have to want to save the world or the trees or the whales or the whatever. You know, just save yourself. I said it early on, and this is probably the longest one you've done so far. But I was the wee girl looking out the window for someone to come and rescue her. But the person that rescued her was me. And that's really what I needed to be all along. And I think we can do that. We can show people how to be that person. That's the most powerful thing we can give to somebody. So as a coach, as a trainer, as a business advisor, as a consultant, I start and end with the person. The strategy and the tools that go with it come after you learn what's that person need. Yeah.
When you say that little girl looking out the window, what age, who are you, where are you?
I think there's a couple of events that I was that little girl. One when I was sort of 5. I think there was another time around the time I was about 11, just feeling, what am I doing here? And the third time was when I thought there was no hope.
And in hindsight, what would you say or do now?
In terms of changing the scenario?
Well, whether it be that or whether it be, you know, what would you do to, you know, what would you say to your younger self?
I've written this letter. God, I would read this letter out, but it would take you all night. That it's okay. Just that. That it's okay. This quest sometimes that we have. There's, if you've ever read the book The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, you know, this endless search for something takes us back to the essence of who we are. The money just enhances who you are. The prestige just enhances who you are. So work on who you are first. And if we can do that, just not even for someone else, just do it for ourselves. The investment that you make should be your first.
Sure.
You first.
What's your way?
Everything else comes later. Everything else comes later. Everything comes from who you are. And too often, as I say, we don't allow people to be vulnerable. The more I've told people the bits about me, the more human that we are, the more successful my business has been. Not because you're telling some sob story, but because I show people, I can show people and do show people how to replay the game tape in a way that empowers them rather than disempowers them. That's what we need to learn from our story. It's the power in your story, not the deficits in your character. The fact that I'm shit at maths has not stopped me being successful in business.
Sure. Well, you married a man very strong in math. There you go.
I've got the right team.
It's all about the power team.
Yeah, but again, and also the more you are true to yourself, and again, authentic has become a difficult word these days because lots of people use it and don't mean it. But the more you are true to yourself, and you are prepared to say, this isn't right for me, rather than trudging along for the next 10 or 15 years of your life doing something that becomes a job and is soul destroying. That's what it becomes. It becomes soul destroying. Because all you do is you then try and make up for the things that it's not giving you. And that's the path to madness, if not death itself.
Well,
life's too short for that. So I'm very grateful for my journey and my ups and downs. I have made money, lost money, made money, lost money. And what I know, without a shadow of a doubt, is that you will find a way through if you just look for it. And your own resilience is absolutely the catalyst to make those things happen.
What's your why now?
My why? I'd say I had two. One is just to live the best possible life that I can. Gary got cancer 2 years, it's coming up 2 years. And again, that focuses you on the immediate. You don't focus long term anymore when someone's diagnosed with cancer. You focus on, can we live today? So living in joy, living in the moment has really become a thing, which is brilliant. Because even though you have a shitty day, you go, tomorrow, if I wake up, we reset the clock and we just go, let's go again. And the other one is, having worked with people like yourself and the people that I've met, and to inspire people, not even if I inspire them, but to inspire people to inspire themselves. That's my other why. I may not plant 1 million trees. I may not, have a 10x business, whatever that is. But if people connect with me and they want me to look at their business, want me to give them advice, I want them to give them something that is tangible, that is doable, that is implementable now. Because now is all we've got. That's my why.
Well, so you're obviously sitting in front of me with multicoloured hair.
I have multicoloured hair, yes.
Just for the benefit of the tape.
Yes, I have pink and purple and white hair.
So on a relaxation, recharging, where are we finding you?
Right now?
In life in general.
Oh my God. I have a million things that I'm still planning on doing. I invest a lot in myself and my health. So I eat well. I go to the gym. I'm strong for a woman my age, stronger than most women my age. I set challenges every year. I do charity work. I have every Tuesday religiously, except for today, with my baby granddaughter, which is an absolute joy. I spend time with my son and my stepson, and my business fits in around all of that, not the other way around.
Well, and you have some mad challenges planned coming up?
I have a lot of mad challenges planned, not just this year. So at the end of the year, I have some runs between now and Christmas. I'm fundraising for a charity that I love, which is Dr. Bordeaux Welfare, who rescue and rehome Dr. Bordeaux's. Turner and Hooch, for those people who are listening and don't know what the Dr. Bordeaux is. And next year we're fundraising for them again because they do so much and we rescue and foster for them. And next year, and I'm training. I am an Iron man in training. I plan to do a full Ironman before my 56th birthday.
Wow.
So I have 14 months to train.
Fantastic.
And that keeps me occupied. I love that. Yeah, and business fits in around everything else.
So what would people say about you?
Now? I still think people would think I'm very gregarious, confident, boisterous, loudmouthed, whatever.
She says with a big smile.
Those who know me, and have worked with me, like yourself, would say I am fiercely loyal, incredibly passionate about people. I genuinely care what happens, not just the people that I work with, but to people in our industry, in the property industry, or indeed in business. I genuinely care. I feel very deeply for those who are struggling and need help. I will always have a tendency to rescue, hence why I rescue dogs. I'm not calling people dogs, by the way, just in case we get whatever. Above average intelligence, although lacking in the maths department. Never give her your tax return. But if you want passion and belief and motivation and a big dose of love with a slap in the face if you're slacking, I would say
I can vouch for that.
You could do worse.
Well, to fire in the belly, what does it mean to you?
I think it is to ignite that belief, whatever that belief is to you, to me, to the people that you're working with. It's to find and fan that wee flame and keep it growing and enable people to determine what it is they want to be, no matter what seems to be standing in their way.
Are you born with it, do you think?
I think everybody has the spark. I think everybody has a divine spark. I mentioned to you about not only having an ability to read a room and read energy, people's energy, because that's what you do when you've lived it in that environment. But everybody has it. Not everybody believes that they do. Not everybody believes that they can make it grow. And all too often what we listen is that wee voice, either inside ourselves or we listen to the voices of other people that try to dim what we are.
Sure.
And it takes a wee while sometimes for us to say, let's just not listen to that. But sometimes that's what we need. We also need someone else sometimes to believe in us. And my pivotal moments, in my moments of doubt, there's always been something, not just in me, but something extra that's given me that wee push when I've needed it. And I've mentioned what those are, those pivotal moments. So it's always good in those pivotal moments to also have that wee extra shove. And I think fire in the belly can do that for a lot of people. It's to give you the belief, the shove, fan the flame a little bit. We all need cheerleaders.
Absolutely. So, tell us, how can we find you? Where can we learn more about you?
Okay, well, unsurprisingly, the website is trishmcgirr.co.uk.
Brilliant.
Very, very
simple,
unimaginative.
Does what it says in the tin.
Does what it says in the tin. And as I say, my acuity scheduling calendar is always open for people who just need a quick chat, a point in the right direction. Or a bit of a laugh about who else can't do maths. And why Countdown is definitely not my favourite programme.
So what are we putting on your gravestone at the end of it all?
Ooh, that's a good one.
We could put a math equation.
E does not equal MC squared. Mine would be equals MC. Does that mean I have McDonald's? No. On my gravestone would be, she loved deeply.
Wow. That's great. It's lovely. On that note, Trish, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
And it's we look forward to hearing from you and hear about the Iron Man Woman success as well.
Indeed.
So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete.
Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Well, that was another great episode of Fire in the Belly. Do you know, this really wouldn't be possible without our great guests taking the time to share their personal journeys. And boy oh boy, sometimes it is personal. It's an absolute pleasure to have that, and then to hear the journeys that people have been on. We've loads more episodes coming up soon, and it's always a pleasure to have guests on. If you do happen to know anyone with true fire in their belly, please reach out to us so we can share their journey, lessons and successes. So, all that's left to say is have a great day, live with fire in your belly, and be the mightiest version of you.